Aleichem Malachei Yashodei Malachei Elyoy Nimelech Malachei Amelochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Boyachem L'Sholoi Malachei Yasholoi Malachei Elyoy Mimelech Malachei Amelochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Baruch Hu Ni L'Sholoi Malachei Yasholoi Malachei Elyoy Malachei Elyoy Mimelech Malachei Amelochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
The Torah says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. And in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, which about 200 years ago, this element of joy, service with joy, was made the central philosophy of Hasidic teachings, of Hasidic doctrine. And the statement was, or the saying used to be, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. If you want to serve God, be happy. That was understood as serve God happily, which means that when you're doing a mitzvah, when you're fulfilling or observing a commandment, do it gladly, do it with joy, with enthusiasm. But the Baal Shem Tov said that it's not when you're doing some other good deed that you should do it with joy, but that if you want to serve God and you have nothing else, no other mitzvah available or at hand, serve God simply by being happy. That if you're happy, you are serving God. Which means that the Baal Shem Tov put joy or simcha into Judaism as an indispensable ingredient rather than the cream or the sugar on top. And the same is, I guess, true with life itself. Simcha is not an optional thing. You can either live with joy or you can live without joy. The Baal Shem Tov was saying you can't do that. If you want to live, be happy. Not live and be happy. So you want to serve God? Be happy. By being happy, we're actually fulfilling the ultimate commandment, or participating in the ultimate relationship with God. When we're not, we'll get back to that in a second. When we're not happy, the melancholy, although there's no commandment against being sad, thou shalt not be melancholy. Yet Hasidim say that although it's not a prohibition, it's not a sin, but it'll drag you down worse than any sin. And although joy is not a mitzvah, but it will lift you up as much as any mitzvah. Why joy and sadness or melancholy are so essential to life can only be understood from a religious point of view, from a revelation point of view. God created the world and everything in it with a very specific, urgent, divine plan, so that everything in this world in some way completes that divine plan. Without this particular item in the world, the divine plan would be lacking. It wouldn't be just a detail, it would be the divine plan unfulfilled. So if we see life as an ingredient in a divine plan, that we are here living out or serving God's purpose, this divine plan, then to be happy means I am willing to do what I was created to do. To be sad means I'm not doing what I was created to do. I don't want to do what I was created to do. Or I don't know what I was created to do. So genuine happiness in this light would mean being in touch with a purpose. I feel like I belong. That's what makes me happy. Sadness then would mean when I don't feel like I belong. Or worse, I feel like I don't belong. Now this is true on every level of life, of existence. For example, physical health. What makes the body healthy? What makes the body unhealthy? What makes the body healthy was when there's a connection between the physical body and the life force, the energy force. When there's a separation, when they go their separate ways, the body suffers. And according to Kabbalah, according to mysticism, the soul suffers too, because it needs the body to live out its purpose, to fulfill its purpose. So a lack of health, illness, means when there's a disconnection between the body and its direction. Life meaning direction, purpose, movement. When that connection is gone, the body is not healthy. The person is not healthy. You have an unhealthy person. A healthy person, a healthy body, is someone who is connected with the direction, with the movement of the soul. The body follows naturally, effortlessly, harmoniously with the movement of the soul. So that when a person wants to move, the leg moves. When he wants to speak, the words come out. When a person wants to speak and the words don't come out, something is wrong. That is a state of illness. When a person wants to get up but the legs don't cooperate or hesitate even, then something is very wrong. So health and happiness are really the same thing on different levels. Health means when the body and the soul are in cooperation, the movement is natural and effortless. And happiness means when the creation and the creator are in harmony. And so the movement is effortless and painless. Now, sadness would then be a displeasure with one's place in life. So Hasidim used to say that if a person is sad, what he's basically doing is objecting to God's plan. Now sometimes we have a reason. We say, why should so many people suffer? Why is there so much suffering in the world? What is God's plan? I don't see it. I don't see the goodness of it. I don't see the justice of it. And that saddens you. And sometimes we don't have a particular reason, or we don't notice that we are objecting to something in God's plan. We're just not happy with life. Disconnecting that from God. Saying, I don't like life. I don't like the way life is going. I don't like what life is shaping up to be. But what is life? Life means the purpose God has for creating you. The reason God put you on earth. That's life. So if you're not happy with life, you're not happy with God. So Hasidim used to say, if you're sad about anything in this world, in life, if you're sad about life, then you're basically saying that God is not doing his job. Or that you would do a better job. Because you're objecting to life as it is. But life as it is God's plan. And that's why if God would come and tell us what the plan is, a person is just not finding someone to marry, or he's not finding the right job, he can't settle into some kind of a routine or lifestyle that is satisfying. And he's very upset, because why should this be? Something is wrong. Life stinks. But what he's really saying is, why doesn't God take better care? If this is his plan, what's the plan? So if God would come along and say, oh, you can't get married yet for these and these reasons, or you're not going to settle into a job until such and such a time because I need you to go here, there, and everywhere. You say, oh, okay, now I understand. So now I see. So if we're sad, it's because we're objecting, we're uncomfortable with something in God's plan. And we're either expecting God to have a better plan or to let us handle it ourselves and we'll do a better job or something along those lines. So all sadness can really be reduced down to this attitude or to this feeling that I don't see where it's going. If we don't believe in God, and if we're not in touch with a divine plan, well, then it's very easy. I don't see where it's going. Life is meaningless. What's the point? What is life all about anyway? Who cares? And so again, you lose touch with that connection, with that flow of purpose or direction in life. Where do you fit in? Where do you belong? And the cure, the real cure, is to regain that position, to once again locate yourself in the scheme of things. Now, that can be done on a smaller scale. You locate yourself in your community. You find your niche among people, which is a miniature example of the divine plan. You find your place in the family. You're finally accepted. You fit in. You make peace with your family. Or in the bigger picture, in the total picture, you really find your place in creation. You know who you are and why you're here. And that really is the solution. Because when you know who you are and why you are, then nothing is too difficult. People go through the most horrendous experiences, the most difficult tortures, the most difficult... and they survive without the slightest hint of depression or melancholy or bitterness. And the way they do it, the reason they do it is because they know where they're going. It's not easy, it's not pleasurable, it's not always even logical or sensible, but they know where they're going. And as long as they know where they're going, they may not be jumping for joy, but they're not depressed. Because life goes on. Because they know where it's going, so they go on with it. But if you don't know where it's going, then you basically come to a halt and you say, what am I doing? So serving God and joy are really not two separate things. It's exactly the same thing. If you're serving God, then you're happy. When you're not serving God, you can't be happy because you don't know where you belong. You don't have that connection anymore.
Have the example from the Bible about Eov. The Bible describes Eov as Yireh Elokim Samara. He was a person that I guess knew very well his task and the God plan, and suddenly something happened, and he left his happiness and becomes very sad, and it's a situation when you don't control, and from a point of the great belief and great happiness, it's not your fault, and you get to a point that you feel something else. So
Job suffered a lot, and he remained a righteous person. He didn't give in to the melancholy. He didn't give in to the sadness. He struggled with it, but he didn't give in to it. And the reason he remained righteous and remained floating and was not killed or destroyed by the suffering is because he knew where he was going. He couldn't explain why God was doing this to him, but knowing that God was doing it kept him alive, kept him afloat. So Job is a good example. He was a righteous man, and he suffered greatly, and his friends tried to explain to him why, how, wherefore, and he couldn't accept any of the explanations. None of them really made any sense to him, and yet he didn't drown in his misery, because although he couldn't explain it, he had a direction. And maybe that's the whole point of the story, that his friends said, if you're going to survive this, you better rationalize it, you better figure it out. Why is God doing this? And he said, no, I can't rationalize it, but it's okay. I'm still stroking, I'm still going, because I know where I'm going. I don't understand the means by which I'm getting there, but I know where I'm going. And that was enough to keep him sane, to keep him. So happiness doesn't mean that you're jumping for joy. I don't think he was partying and having a lot of fun. Joy means an equilibrium, a sense of rightness about yourself and about life. Sadness means a sense of wrongness about yourself and about life. So we're not talking about happiness like on Purim. We're not talking about celebration happiness when you're suffering. That would be inappropriate. It would probably be insane also. If a person's having real, genuine tsaros, like the sufferings of Job, if he was celebrating and dancing and singing, he'd be a sick person. He would be out of touch with reality. So pain is pain, and serious issues are serious issues. And then there's sadness. Then there's melancholy. So he was serious. He shouldered his burden, so he wasn't about to dance and sing, but he wasn't depressed either, because he knew where he was going. There was a chassid, a very special man, who suffered greatly in Russia before Glasnost. The communists were out to destroy him, and he survived. He survived after a lot of suffering, labor camps, Siberia, the whole works. I met him in New York. It was during Sukkot. We were sitting in a sukkah, and he suffered from all sorts of lingering ill effects of the beatings that he took, and of the hunger, the starvation, the frostbite. And he leaned over the table and he got this stab of pain in his side or his back, I don't know. And generally he hides his pain very well. But this was like sudden, and it took his breath away. And he looked at me quickly to see if I had noticed. And I had. So instantly, without any hesitation, he breaks into this smile and he says, you see, a person has to be careful about every move he makes. And right away he translated into a lesson in life, and it was fine. Rather than, woe is me, I can't even move without pain. So he had a direction. Viktor Frankl wrote a book and introduced this notion that at the heart of the human being is not what Freud thought there was, but rather that at the essence, at the very core of the human being, is this search for meaning. Life has to have meaning. And he talks about the people in concentration camps who survived intact, with their sanity intact, and those who didn't. And he says the difference is this one had a meaning to his life. Something gave his life meaning, and so he survived. And this one had no meaning to his life, so he didn't make it. Which is very interesting and very important. But then the crucial question begs to be asked. If at the very core of our existence and the very center of our being is this need for meaning, well then, where is the meaning? Then what is meaning? So he gets to that point, he says, well, everybody has to find their own meaning in life, which is like saying, go seek your bliss. The Torah tells us what the meaning of life is. It's not a subjective thing, it's an objective reality. Life itself has meaning. It's not like you have to go find a meaning to life. If you exist, there is meaning, because God created you purposefully. So it's not like you have to create a purpose to your life. Your Creator is a purposeful Creator, and so He created you already with a purpose. So life itself, living out the years that God gives us, that is the purpose. That is the meaning. That's the direction. And therefore, If we're doing that, then we are happy. If we're not doing that, that's called melancholy. And that being created in God's image, the body reflects the soul, the same holds true for the body. As long as the body is marching in harmony with the vibration of the soul, you have a healthy body. As soon as the body starts marching to its own drum, you have an unhealthy body, because the connection has been severed, the body doesn't have a direction. So health and illness, happiness and melancholy are the same thing. And serving God and not serving God is also the same thing. Serving God is happy and healthy. Not serving God is melancholy and illness. So after having discovered a connection between the body and the mind, the psychosomatic connection, we now have to complete the circle and make the connection between creator and creation. That the physical body can suffer because of some disturbance in the relationship with your creator. So you have psychosomatic and you have psycho-divine. That if the divinity in your life isn't right, then your mind isn't right. And if your mind isn't right, your body isn't right. So the circle is completed. So in Tanya, the Rebbe says that there are basically three kinds of sadness. One is a sadness caused by physical suffering. When the physical condition of your life is not pleasurable, that can cause sadness. A person isn't making a living, a person's health isn't very good, or a person's family, children, you suffer from not having children, or having children but not having any great nachas or pleasure from the children. So these are the basics of life, but they are physical, the physical basics of life: health, sustenance, and family. When something is missing there, it can become a cause for sadness. But as we said before, every physical disturbance, every event, everything we have and everything we're missing is all part of a divine plan. And it becomes a depression, it becomes melancholy when we no longer remember that the plan includes this too. So as long as we know that everything is included in the plan, we're okay. As soon as we make an exclusion, as soon as we make an exception, we say, there is a divine plan, God knows what he's doing, God created me, but this ingrown toenail, this is not part of the plan. This is getting in the way of the plan. I could pursue the plan a lot better if I didn't have this ingrown toenail. Not realizing that the ingrown toenail is as much part of God's plan as all the good news in life. So the solution, the response, the reaction to sadness coming from physical causes is to include that in your picture. Broaden your picture. If you know that you exist for a reason, include your suffering in that reason. Don't exclude it. As soon as you exclude it, you've opened a gap, and that's where the sadness comes in. There are no gaps. God doesn't look away for a moment. It's always part of the plan. And again, the most vivid way of visualizing this is if God would come along and tell you why it is necessary for some divine plan that you have an ingrown toenail, then you wouldn't be depressed. Because you can handle an ingrown toenail. What you can't handle is the fact that life is out of control. So when you can't see this as being part of God's plan, then the plan has broken, and that's depressing. It's not the ingrown toenail that causes depression. In fact, pain does not cause depression. In many cases, pain has caused the opposite of depression, where people were depressed for whatever reason, and then they suffered this intense pain, and it broke them out of their depression. It got them going. And in many cases where people are suffering true, genuine physical pain, they don't have time to be depressed. They can't afford to be depressed. Their adrenaline is pumping too hard to get away from the pain or to save themselves from the pain, that with all that adrenaline you can't possibly be depressed. So when pain is a cause for depression, it's not the pain itself. It's the inability to see the plan. Life is no longer cohesive. All of a sudden life is going in too many directions and you just throw up your hands and say, I can't, this isn't working. Something's wrong. We've been derailed. And if you're derailed, then even the slightest pain is going to depress you. So depression coming from a physical problem, the Rebbe says, why should you be depressed about it if it's as much a part of the divine plan as all the good news in your life? You're not derailed. This is your life. This is the divine plan. So there are parts to the divine plan that are delicious, and there are parts of the divine plan that are bitter. But you haven't switched tracks, and you're not off the track. This is the track. It's fine. Just keep on going. When the Jews left Egypt and they came to the sea, and they were trapped between the Egyptians who were chasing them and the sea in front of them, they didn't know what to do. A painful predicament. But the painful part of it was that they couldn't understand what God wants. Took us out of Egypt, and now what? And we're not out. We thought we were getting away, but we're not getting away. We left Egypt, and suddenly here they are again. So it wasn't that they were so afraid of the Egyptians. It's that they lost sight of where they were going. God said, let's leave Egypt and go to Mount Sinai. But then all of a sudden you can't go to Mount Sinai. There's an ocean in the way. There's a sea in the way. And the Egyptians are catching up. So now all of a sudden they lost sight of the direction. Where were we going anyway? Where are we going? And that's why no matter what reaction they came up with or suggestion they came up with, God said no. They said, let's fight the Egyptians. God said no. He said, let's go back to Egypt. No. Let's kill ourselves. He said no. So okay, then let's pray. God said no. So they said, then what should we do? He said, do what we started off doing. You're on your way to Mount Sinai. Go to Mount Sinai. What are you stopping for? They said, well, there's a sea in the way. God said, so what? You know where you're supposed to go? Go. So God's answer was to Moses, speak to the children of Israel and tell them to go. Go where? Go where you set out to go. I told you we were leaving Egypt, we're going to Mount Sinai. So go. So they started going, and that's when the sea split. So when we see a sea in front of us and we don't know what to do, and it looks like it's hopeless and we're trapped and we're back against the wall and we don't know what to do anymore, you do what you're always meant to do. Go along the path you were meant to go on. And then the seas split. The impossible becomes possible, as long as you know where you're going. So the melancholy doesn't come so much from the trap or from the fear or from the pain. It comes from the loss of direction. I thought I was going someplace, now I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if I can go there. That's the breakdown. That's where everything falls apart. So God says, if you're serving me, if you left Egypt because I told you to, then what'd you stop for? What are you quitting on me? It may seem like there's a difficulty, but you've got your orders, your marching orders, keep on marching. So they did, and the sea split. So when it comes to physical problems, physical discomforts, physical disappointment, physical pain, the answer is, it's all part of life. You haven't been derailed. This is it. This is life. You want to live it? Live it. Like you have, as you always have. You can't live with the good news and collapse on the bad news. The good and the bad news, that's life. So if you're living life, why'd you stop? This is life too. And I think that's the meaning of that when bad things happen, you're supposed to say, this too is for the good. It's a little ambitious to say it's for the good. Very often it turns out to be for the good. And in hindsight, we appreciate it. But at the moment, it's very hard to convince yourself this is good. But at the very minimum, this too is for the good means this too is life. You know, it's not good, it's bad. It's painful, it's terrible, it's bitter. But it's life, not something else. Plan hasn't changed. You're still on the same track, going in the same direction. Only sometimes it's downhill and easy, and sometimes it's uphill and hard. But it's the same track, and there's no reason to be confused about it. In fact, it's really a question of trusting the relationship. Every relationship has its ups and downs. But the ups and the downs both make up the relationship. So it's not like the up times in the relationship, that's the relationship. And the down times, that's when we're not relating. And we kind of get past that and back into the up times, and then we're back into the relationship. You've been in the relationship all along, during the ups and the downs. And the same thing in our relationship with God. There are times when we see the divine plan, or we think we do, that somehow the divine plan happens to match what we think life should be, and sometimes it doesn't. But whether it does or doesn't, it's still the plan, it's still life, this is still the direction. There's no reason to change purposes. So that's physical pain. Today there seems to be a rash of depression over physical causes because the economy is so bad. And it stands to reason that when people's plans are shattered, it can easily move on to being life shattered. So there's a lot of this self-doubting and what's happening to me and what's going to be and so on because of the financial. But there's no question that all of this is part of the preparation for the messianic revelation. So it's all for the good. It's all building up to a positive climax. The other kind of sadness is a spiritual sadness, or a religious melancholy. And in this there are two kinds. One is the loss of favor. When a person feels that he's become so corrupt or has sinned so badly that he's forever banished from God's presence. He will never make it up. He'll never be good again. He can never be acceptable again. That's the loss of hope. Giving up on salvation. The other kind is not so hopeless. It's not that I have sinned so badly that I will never again be acceptable, but that my condition as it is today is depressing because I haven't gotten anywhere. I see no progress. It's not that I'm so terrible. It's not like I've lost hope in salvation. I'm acceptable, but it's not what I want to be. I want to be good, and I'm not getting there. These are the two kinds of religious melancholy, and these three kinds of melancholy really cover all the bases. The first is physical pain, discomfort, disappointment. The second is the loss of hope of salvation. And the third is a rejection of self. I'm not good enough, in my own opinion. Concerning the two kinds of religious melancholy, the Rebbe says in Tanya, if the melancholy is a loss of hope of salvation, that's why you're depressed, because you feel that you are no longer acceptable to God. then you have to ask yourself a very honest and very brutal question. If you're really worried about whether you're acceptable to God, shouldn't you ask Him? Why are you deciding who and what is acceptable to God? So if a person were genuinely concerned with whether he is acceptable to God, he would do what God instructs. If you have sinned, what are you supposed to do? Ask God. You sinned against Him, find out what He wants. Ask Him, how can I make it up to you? But for you to be the judge, to sit back and say, no, I think I've blown it. I'm beyond salvation. Then you're playing God. Then you don't really care what God thinks. You're wrapped up with what you think. You've become the judge. You're playing God. If you really were concerned with how bad you have blown it, then the immediate question is, with whom did you blow it? And find out from the other party what it takes to fix it. If, on the other hand, the person is really not concerned with what God feels, or with what God wants, or what God finds acceptable, he's just got it into his head and made up his mind that he is beyond salvation, then it's not coming from a spiritual concern. It's coming from a selfish concern. It's the evil inclination who prefers having you depressed, because then he can get you to indulge in anything. Because when a person is sad and depressed, his resistance is very low. And that's when a person is sad, he gets thoughts into his head that he would never tolerate when he's healthy. He would never harbor such thoughts. And that adds to the depression. Now he thinks he's losing his mind, because all of a sudden he's thinking about killing his mother, which is an insane thought for him, because he doesn't think that way. Only when the resistance is down, no weird thought can be resisted, because you don't have the strength to fight it off. So all of a sudden you're thinking about becoming a murderer, or committing suicide, or doing horrible things, immoral things that you would never have considered a day earlier. And once you get out of the sadness, you'll never consider it again. I mean, you don't even really have to fight the thought. It's just preposterous to begin with. And the only reason it exists is because when you can't lock your door, when the lock isn't working, then anybody can come in. But as soon as you repair your lock, it's not a problem anymore. So the depression is not coming from a genuine spiritual concern. Am I really acceptable to God? It's coming from an evil inclination, from the sinful nature, which we all have. And that sinful nature thrives on sadness. Because when we're healthy, we don't indulge in these crazy things. So when a person feels a sadness, a hopelessness, a despair of salvation, as they call it, his first question has to be, am I really concerned with salvation, or am I just depressed? If I'm really concerned with salvation, I got to go to the local authority and find out what God wants me to do for having sinned. And whatever God wants me to do, that's fine. I mean, after all, I sinned against Him. If mending my ways is acceptable to God, then fine, then I'm acceptable. Because it's His shot. I mean, He calls the shot. And if I don't do that, then I'm simply indulging in an old-fashioned depression. It has nothing to do with spiritual salvation or with religion or anything else. The third kind of depression, which is a bad opinion of myself. I want to be good and I'm not getting there. So it's like a defeated feeling rather than a hopeless feeling. I'm trying, I'm struggling, I'm not getting there. I don't see the progress. It's not that I don't think I'll ever get there, but I'm frustrated by the lack of progress. To this, the Rebbe says, what do you call progress? And who is the judge of progress? Person feels that he wants to be guiltless, without sin. He wants to be a saint. He wants to be a tzaddik. And he works very hard at it. And in the end finds out that he's still mortal. And he still has temptation. And he still has evil thoughts. And he still has weaknesses. Not the insane ones we were talking about before, but the normal daily temptations. And he's shocked and disappointed because he had really set his mind on becoming a saint, and saints don't have these temptations or these feelings or these attractions or appetites. And so he feels that he's not making progress because he's not any closer to being a saint than when he started. So the Rebbe says, now ask yourself a simple question. Are you meant to be a saint? Or is that just your own plan? Did you set up your own artificial goal and now you're frustrated because you haven't reached it? Very few people are meant to be saints. And generally, those who are meant to be saints are born that way. For the rest of us, human beings, God has no intention of making us into saints. And it's not the purpose. It is not our life goal to become a saint. Our purpose in life is to have the attractions, the challenges, the weaknesses, the temptations of the non-saint, and to struggle with those temptations. And every time we win, we have accomplished something for God. Every time we lose, we've slipped. We've messed up God's plan. But He wants us that way. I mean, it's like saying in an army, the general generally stands back and keeps his uniform neat and clean. But the foot soldier, he's out there in the trenches, he gets all muddied and dirtied by the battle. And for the soldier on the front line, in the foxhole, to be disappointed with himself because his boots aren't polished is ridiculous. Nobody wants your boots polished. We want you to be in the trenches, and there you inevitably get some dirt on you. And that's okay, as long as you're fighting the war. For a general who is sitting in the tent, reading maps, yeah, why shouldn't his shoes be polished? They should be. So there are saints and there are soldiers in God's picture, in God's plan.
What is the meaning of Mataya, you, Masai, myself, or each one has a measure of anger himself, potentially?
That can be very confusing. The Talmud says, everyone should say, when will my deeds match the deeds of our forefathers, of Abraham and Isaac? Which sounds like we're all trying to be as saintly as they were. But the key word here is my deeds. When will my deeds be like their deeds? Yeah, we can do the mitzvah as perfectly as they can do it, but we can't be like them. In other words, I can observe the commandments as perfectly as Abraham. But Abraham did it without a struggle. I'm going to have to do it with a struggle. So I'm not trying to be Abraham. I'm trying to do the same things he did because God gave us the same commandments.
Probably if you work enough, you will do it without
a struggle. Maybe if we lived as long as Noah. In the 120 years that God gives us, we won't accomplish it. We will not ever be rid of temptation. Because wrestling with the temptation is its own purpose. I mean, I don't know why we have this idea that being without temptation is the ideal condition. It may be for us, because we'd rather not struggle. It would certainly be easier if we didn't have to struggle. But in God's plan, being without a struggle is not the best. And that's why very few are created that way. Most of us were created to struggle.
But if you get to the point that you could do it without struggle, means that you have working many years for that.
Yes, if you get there, then it's very nice, but we're not going to. And since we're not going to, it is wrong for a person to set that up as his goal. A person should not make it his goal to become exempt of temptation. And anybody today, with very few exceptions, anybody today who feels that he has transcended all temptation is a fool, a dangerous fool.
So what is the whole yesod of the Chassidut? You try to be Chassid.
Yes.
What is the whole idea of the whole gates of Mesilat Yesharim, of the whole books that give you the way how to put yourself mile by mile and get to the point that you are a Chassid.
A Chassid doesn't mean...
You do the mitzvot, you do the commandments, and the point that you don't struggle anymore. Because you work very hard, you have the knowledge, you go towards that.
No, you don't work towards being free of struggle. You work towards being good at the struggle. You work towards winning consistently in the struggle, but you don't work at being free of struggle. And as you work and as you become better, the struggle changes. Obviously, a kid may be struggling with the temptation to steal his friend's toy, but if you develop and get wiser and more in charge and in control of yourself, you'll never be tempted to steal.
If I was struggling 5 years ago to keep Shabbos in a certain level, and today I keep Shabbos by the easiest way, there's no problem. That's not the purpose. That's not the purpose. I fulfill now the Shabbos correctly.
Yeah,
without
to fulfill Shabbos correctly is the purpose.
So,
but that doesn't mean that you have become free of temptation. This is no longer a problem. But there are other problems, and there will always be. In other words, there is a temptation to sin. Not to any particular sin, just to sin, to the dark side. There's always a dark side to our nature. But the dark side moves and grows as we grow. Once Shabbos has become part of your life and it just become unthinkable not to keep Shabbos, then that's no longer the arena in which your struggle is going to take place.
So that's what I will try to do the entire mitzvot.
Yes.
Step by step.
And
I got to the point that I don't have struggle anymore for that area.
For that particular area, right.
Yeah.
That's why the idea is, when will my deeds, when will my observance of Shabbos be as permanent, as real, as unquestioned as Avraham's observance of Shabbos? But then my dark side will move on to something else. So it won't be, should I observe Shabbos, should I not observe Shabbos, should I keep kosher, should I not keep kosher? No, that's resolved once and for all. But should I be proud? Should I be arrogant? Should I feel more righteous than that? This is going to be the new problem. So it goes on and becomes more and more subtle, but there will always be the dark side. And also, even with Shabbos, and even with kashrus, once you've resolved it and you've settled into it and as a permanent part of your life, things can happen to reverse it. And all of a sudden we find people who have been keeping Shabbos for many years and it was never a question, and then something happens in their life and all of a sudden it's a question again.
That's happened also to the Moshe Rabbeinu. We've seen finally.
To the saints it doesn't happen. Because a saint doesn't have a dark side. It's not that he's resisting his dark side, he doesn't have one. So the person who feels that he can trust himself completely and that every instinct and every impulse is righteous and without sin, this is a fool.
So what's the Torah that says, Ein tzaddik ba'aretz aser ya'aseh tov v'lo yicheta?
I mean, that does not refer to the patriarchs or to the prophets. They are without sin. Not only without sin, without a capacity for sin. So going back to the sadness thing, the ambition doesn't match the person, and that's why it's tripping him up and causing depression. Because he thinks he could be a saint, and he's not destined to be a saint, and it's not his job to be a saint. On the contrary, his job is to be successful in his struggle, but not to be without a struggle. And if he is successful in his struggle, then he has every reason to be happy, not sad. Shouldn't be sad over the fact that he needs to struggle. He should be happy over the fact that he is struggling successfully, because that's what he was created for. That's what the average person was created for. And only the exceptional 1 out of a million was born to be a saint. So here you have 3 categories of sadness, and the response to each of them seems to be the same. If the sadness is coming from physical problems, where do you think these physical problems are coming from? They're coming from God's plan. It's all part of God's plan. No reason to be sad. Number 2, if the problem is coming from the despair of salvation, because you've sinned yourself out of the picture, says who? To God, there is no such thing, because there is no place outside of his picture. He created the world, and he created the sins. Now, of course, he wants us not to sin, but it's not like God can be destroyed by a sin. So no sin is unpardonable for God, ultimately. So if you're really concerned about whether you've got any hope left in you, that's not up to you to decide. Ask God. Find out. And the third thing, if the sadness is coming from a disappointment in self, perhaps your goal has been unrealistic to begin with. And you may, in fact, be doing quite well. Given your role, given your job, you're doing it quite well. Only you thought your job was something else. Well, of course you're failing at something else. You're never going to succeed at something else. So the Jew who is trying to be something else, or the average person who is trying to be a saint, they're obviously going to destroy themselves and be caught in hopelessness and despair, because there's no way they're going to succeed, because you're not being what God created you to be. So in all 3 cases, the response and the solution in a word is go back to the plan. Go back to the plan. The plan is still there. And this, I think, is the reassurance, the security, the stability that comes from knowing what God wants. Because what God wants isn't going to change. So after years of tumult, and after years of confusion, and after years of trying one thing after another, you come back to what you were taught by your grandmother, and it's still there. It hasn't changed. At least something is predictable. At least some things are reliable. So your mother told you that this is what a Jew does, and this is how a Jew does it. You come back 50 years later, yeah, it's still the same. It hasn't changed. And there's a wealth of sanity there. There's a wealth of strength there, because that's where it all comes from. That is the plan. And the fact that the plan won't change, no matter how long you ignore it, you can come back to it and pick up as if you never left. That's our strength. That's what saves us. And that's the way it was meant to be. So it's not looking for artificial patches on our wounds. It's simply going back to what we were supposed to be all along, and that always works. Always works. For that we have God's guarantee. That if you're doing what you were created to do, God guarantees you success. You're trying to do something else, then you're on your own. And if you fail, you got nobody to blame. But you also have the opportunity to come back and do what you were created to do, and succeed at it, because we always do. So this this destructive and depressing cloud called melancholy is really another word for guilt. Anytime we've deviated from the purpose, we feel guilty. We may not know it, but we feel guilty. When you're not where you belong, you're automatically trespassing where you don't belong, and we feel guilty. And this guilt is what tears us apart. Not the pain, not the disappointment, not the hopelessness, not the fear. It's the guilt. I am not where I belong, so how can anything be right? If I'm not on the track that I'm supposed to be on, how can anything work? And so, obviously, we're going to be depressed. There's no other way. And the solution to that is not to try to build the person up and make him believe in himself. And this is all artificial stuff. The solution is get on the track. It's always there. The track never leaves. It's there. You're on the wrong track, well, switch to the right track. And to say, I can't do that, that doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. You try to be someone else's son because you like your friend's parents better. And it's really wonderful because they're easy to get along with. But after a few years, you realize, who am I kidding? They've got their family and I'm not part of it. So you say, okay, I'll go back to my family. And you think, no, I can't do that. I can't. But that doesn't make any sense. If you could leave your family and at least temporarily switch tracks to somebody else's family where you don't belong, if you can get onto a track that is not yours, shouldn't you be able to get onto a track that is yours? And shouldn't that be even easier than getting comfortable on a track that you were not born to? So if we can be wrong without too much effort, we slip away and we take little liberties and all of a sudden we're very far afield and we're very wrong and we don't want to be there. We have no intentions of going that far. And yet we got there almost imperceptibly, painlessly. Well, if we can be wrong so easily, then we can be right even more easily. Because when we're right, we're simply where we belong. And if this is your track, of course you can get onto your track. Doesn't matter how long you've been gone. So the power of good is always stronger than the power of evil because evil is the option, not the original reality. We were created on the right path. We were created on the right track. That's your home. That feels home. That feels natural. That feels right. So if we can fake it on the wrong path, we can certainly make it on our true path, on our right path. So with what's going on today, with all this despair and gloom and doom, all we need to know is that the path hasn't changed, the Creator hasn't changed, we're headed in a good place.
Malachei